This is the ASUS GL553VE, a gaming laptop that tries to achieve absolutely no compromises, and that's a bit of fresh air in a time where laptops are recently being made with a lot of compromises, whether that's on performance or thickness or ports and I/O. But this laptop reminds me of the good old days of gaming laptops when I was growing up. They were somewhat thick, had lots of ports, lots of horsepower, and of course, the red gaming aesthetic. And it feels like for so long, recently gaming laptops were either one of two things. They were either incredibly thick, portable desktops with a gimmick like water cooling, or they were like the Razer Blade, which was thin but got hot to the touch, had cooling problems, and some massive problems with I/O. The GL553VE strikes what I find to be the correct balance of portability, performance, and features to where I find it to be the best all-rounder on the market right now. So let's get right into this review. For build quality, the ASUS GL553VE has a mostly plastic body with some aluminium such as the back panel, which has an illuminated ASUS ROG logo. It weighs 2.5 kilograms with the battery, and it measures at a standard 15.6-inch display size. The GL553VE also starts at around about 1900 Australian dollars, but for other territories it starts at around about 1200 USD, but of course pricing is variable depending on the retailer or the store and if there's any sales on. Performance is a massive strong point here for the laptop. It features an NVIDIA GTX 1050 Ti with an Intel i7-7700HQ 4-core processor, 16GB of DDR4 RAM, a 256GB SSD, and a 1TB hard drive, as well as a 60Hz 1080p display. So as you can see here, it has some pretty interesting specs. And it's basically what I find to be the perfect combination of power and portability, in that you get a powerful 4-core 8-thread processor mixed with a full-fat GTX 1050 Ti, and I would say pretty much the recommended amount of RAM in 2018. Even the little things like the 256GB SSD allow for quick boot times under a minute, as well as snappy app performance and even easier file management. And the 1050 Ti here is really the star of the show, and as a gamer it's a welcome addition, allowing me to play almost any esport title like Overwatch, CSGO, Dota 2, and even some PUBG at 60 FPS at 1080p at medium to high settings depending on each game. In terms of benchmarks, it scored a 141 for single core and 728 for multi-core in Cinebench. For Firestrike, we had a graphics score of 7600, and for Firestrike Extreme, a graphics score of 3666. And for Univision Superposition, a score of 5229 at medium settings and 3747 at high settings. So this is exactly in line with a stock 1050 Ti for desktops. So for gaming results and for gaming benchmarks, you're going to see very, very similar results to a desktop 1050 Ti. And that's really valuable in this day and age where gaming laptops have either been complete overkill by putting in a GTX 1080 at 1080p, which makes really no sense, or they have an underpowered chip like the MX150 at 1080p, where you're going to see frame rates in around about the 30s. But the GL553VE strikes what I would really say is the correct balance, because it allows for a mostly cool and quiet machine, because the 1050 Ti doesn't actually soak up a lot of power and expel a lot of heat, whilst also allowing gamers to have absolutely no slowdown and be able to play those games just fast and fluid. So the GL553VE, I just put it through my own little test, and I played over 100 hours of Overwatch on the thing, and it was completely stutter free, and I was able to play at platinum rank with absolute ease like I would on my desktop. CSGO was a bit of a different story. It was smooth and ran completely fine, but I guess because I'm so spoilt by my 144Hz monitor back at home, when I was on holiday and I was playing with the 60Hz screen, I just found it a bit strange and hard to play. That's not because of the actual laptop. The laptop was doing just fine. It's just my brain couldn't really deal with being back at 60 Hz. So for, games that you don't normally play on your desktop, it's probably pretty good. Something like PUBG and Overwatch was completely fine for me, but as soon as I had to go back to CSGO at 144 Hz, it made it so much better than playing it at 60 Hz. But overall, I think the laptop is actually really, really good when it comes to gaming, and that's the best part of this laptop. So in terms of performance, I give it an A+. I don't really have much to say about the keyboard since it was actually pretty good. It registered correctly every key that I pressed. It had an actuation point pretty similar to my Razer Black Widow Chroma. The only difference is it's not a mechanical keyboard, so overall I didn't really have any issues with it, and using it for gaming was more than adequate. I was able to adjust actually quite quickly, and in fact I'd say it's actually a really underrated feature about the notebook. The keyboard is just really good. It also has RGB backlighting with 3 color zones, meaning that you can actually change these to make it suit your look from the millions of colors to choose from. So overall, the keyboard gets an A from me. It's very good. The only real problem that I have with it is it's only 3 color zones for the RGB lighting. So if they could do it on a per key basis, I think it would be way, way better. But other than that, it was actually really good. At the end of the day, trackpads are kind of meaningless on gaming laptops, as the whole point to using a gaming laptop is to also use an external peripheral like a mouse, which kind of replaces the trackpad. But when I did use the trackpad, which was very rarely, it did work really, really well. It registered my clicks correctly, both of the buttons were really good, all the gestures for zooming and scrolling worked great, and it uses Windows precision drivers. My only real complaint is the positioning of the trackpad on the laptop. Now, if it had been in a more kind of reasonable spot like the center of the laptop, it would have been way more comfortable for touch typers to use as well as gamers. I think if they moved it to the center, it would make a whole lot more sense since it doesn't interfere with you using the W, A, S, and D keys as much, and there's just less of a chance of your palm accidentally swiping it. But of course, you can disable the trackpad or change the palm rejection to limit these kinds of issues, but if they actually change the position of it, it would also help out a lot with that. As for the hinge is about what you can expect for this price. It can be lifted with one hand pretty easily, and it feels pretty solid with minimal wobble, which is great for gamers. That being said, it's nothing special, but it's certainly much better than some hinges on other gaming notebooks. I touched on the screen a little bit before, and I get it. It's a gaming laptop in a budget market, so they couldn't really fit in a 120 Hz refresh rate, but if they could, I think that that's what's most important to gamers. Yes, right now it has really accurate and vivid colors, and it's got really good brightness that you can see indoors and outdoors, but when you're making a gaming laptop, having a higher refresh rate goes a whole lot further than brightness and colors, and there are some 120 Hz display laptops out on the market at not that much of a higher price. So while the screen wasn't terrible on this, it's just average really. If they bumped it up to a 120 Hz display, I think it really would have made this laptop far more inviting. So that's a bit of a suggestion for ASUS on what they could do with their next set of models, sort of in this price bracket. If they can somehow fit in a 120 Hz panel, that would be really, really awesome. Or the ability to overclock the display. Even if it was 75 Hz, anything higher than 60 I think is much appreciated. But of course, making a laptop is a challenge, so I'm not going to beat them too much over this. So for the screen, I'll give it an A. It's a pretty good screen. It's just not the best one that I've seen, obviously, and it could have some little minor improvements that I think would really work for gamers. Another strong point of this laptop is the I/O and the ports, and I can't stress this enough. With more and more laptops and phones even ditching critical features like the headphone jack or an HDMI output or even USB-A, the GL553VE delivers on all of these. It gives you a headphone jack, two USB 3.0 Type A ports, a USB 2.0 port that's Type A, an Ethernet port, and an HDMI output, as well as a USB 3.1 Type C, but unfortunately it's not Thunderbolt. So this is certainly an excellent selection in comparison to most notebooks out on the market, but do bear in mind that comes at the caveat of increased weight and also thickness. But I think, if you're willing to at least have better port selection, who cares if it's like 1mm thicker or whatever it is. At the end of the day, you're getting more port selections, and that means that you're carrying around less adapters and having to spend less money on that kind of crap. So I think that in this day and age, this is really where you want to be at. This is the type of port selection that almost every laptop should have, and I'm really happy with this. So this gives an A+ in my book for I/O and ports. Anything is better than MacBook at this point, so it's great. Now, the speakers on this laptop are really, really good. Now, while you can't have a party with them, if you're using them for watching a movie or for watching YouTube videos, they're absolutely perfect for that kind of thing. And I guess the sweet spot that I found them to kind of work really good at is at around about 50 to 60% volume. That's where they're loud to a point where, you can hear them throughout a room, but they don't have distortion. At 75% volume, they are very, very loud, but they have those small signs of distortion, and of course when you bump them all the way up to 100%, there's lots of distortion. But that's not really out of the ordinary, and you can certainly use the speakers just fine for everyday use. Even 30% is, I guess, good enough for one person if you're kind of watching a movie in a quiet setting. But I found 50 to 60% being good enough for a group of people to watch a video on a laptop, and that's where these speakers kind of excel. So yeah, I give the speakers about a B+. They're pretty good, but they're not the best ones I've ever heard, and they do have some distortion at points where I wish they really didn't, like 75% for instance, volume, but other than that, they're pretty good. As for battery life, you're looking at around about 3 to 4 hours of use while web browsing or watching YouTube videos or doing Word documents and stuff like that. For gaming, it was a little bit more consistent with around 30 to 50 minutes depending on the game, but you got to remember when you're using it on the battery, you're getting performance that is lower than what you would get when you're plugged in. Now, I think the battery is where the device is really let down. It's one of its weak points. It only has a 48 watt-hour battery, and that's pretty low when there are other similarly priced gaming laptops with 60 watt-hour batteries, or there are thinner laptops with a similar battery capacity. Now, of course, you've got to take into account that this kind of doesn't ruin the laptop, because even though it's got a lower battery, it also has those strong points like better I/O or a bigger full fat keyboard with a numpad, or it has a larger display, or it has better speakers. And those are the things that you got to understand. With a thicker device, you get obviously better components in them, and just overall there's more space for the laptop manufacturer, in this case ASUS, to fit more in. So yeah, even though you're looking at a device that's only going to last 3 to 4 hours, it obviously does have higher quality components like a full i7, as well as the GTX 1050 Ti, but it also has those things like a bigger keyboard and better speakers, etc., etc. So, even though it's a weak point, and you probably won't be able to take it to campus, and make it last 6 hours, you got to understand it's also kind of a laptop that has higher quality components in it, and you got to understand the whole idea of the laptop. But this certainly is a weak point for the laptop, and you're not going to get MacBook levels of battery life out of it. Overall, the ASUS GL553VE is a great gaming laptop. It has really good performance and power, amazing I/O, a good display, a decent trackpad, and a very customizable and satisfying to use keyboard. And I think gamers will overall be very happy with this machine. Where the shortfalls are really come down to the aesthetics or design of the device. I mean, it does have that gaming aesthetic and the red color. Some people don't like the color red or the gaming aesthetic. I certainly wouldn't take this into a business sort of setting. It would look really weird, across from a MacBook or something like that. But overall, the design or whatever is a subjective thing. Some people will like it, some people won't. And I guess the other shortfall is the battery life and the battery. But I think both of those can be improved in ASUS's next laptops. Maybe they can, like I said, maybe change some of the aesthetics. Maybe they can make the aesthetics RGB customizable, for instance, so you can change it to whatever color you want, which would obviously help the aesthetics a whole lot more. And with the battery, they could upgrade the battery to something like a 60 watt-hour battery on their next model. And if they do manage to put in that larger capacity battery and also lose maybe those red accents, then I think they have a real winner on their hands. In terms of what it is right now, the GL553VE does have some of those shortfalls, but most of the negatives aren't really that bad and can easily be compensated for by either carrying around the charger or changing the palm rejection of the trackpad. Or you can maybe even find like a laptop skin that you could put on top of it if you don't like the aesthetics. So overall, I give the laptop an 8.5 out of 10 since it handled all the games that I threw at it just fine. It has above average or great features in pretty much every category that I've covered, and it stays cool and reasonably quiet. It doesn't get particularly loud, and also the charger isn't actually that big. So I think it's a really good laptop overall. But like I said, you got to take into all those things into account when you're buying a laptop, and you can't just, pick on one particular thing. So that's what I just kind of have my thoughts about. If you guys have your own thoughts about the laptop or any other laptops, leave them in the comment section below. And thank you for watching this review. We really do appreciate it. Subscribe to the channel if you want more reviews like this. And I'll also leave a link in the description to where you can buy the ASUS GL553VE either on Amazon or some local stores here in Australia. And I thank you all for watching.